Thornton Township trustees put a cap on Supervisor Tiffany Henyard's event spending. How does Tiff respond? I don't need no credit card. Let's get into it. Here we go. Here's some footage from last night's Thornton board meeting.
I'm not thinking about the overall picture. And I told y'all should talk to the staff before making a law that don't make sense for the staff on a day-to-day operation. You have to understand how they operate daily and their needs. Not just making laws and then now it does not work. Now how you accept. You made a rule, a law that they can't abide by because their operation needs more than what you wrote as a law. So y'all will make a minute?
Motion to approve ordinance 24-006 as.
Okay, well, our motion to amend that take supervisor off, like I just said. That's what I'm talking about. Y'all with y'all way. I'm adding in this law because I don't want a credit card. So I'm making a motion.
I don't want a credit card.
That we amend this ordinance as it relates to a supervisor having anything to do with credit card.
Tiff went on to defend the township of Thornton having like 8 or 9 credit cards when they used to operate their township with 1. And her argument is, well, this is an issue of transparency. If everybody has a credit card, then you know who's been spending the credit card money. Well, that's exactly the issue that they're having in the Village of Dolton. Is we know Lori Lightfoot's report, they spent $40,000+ on 3 charges on Amazon with somebody getting hold of a credit card, Village of Dolton credit card, and buying stuff on Amazon. I mean, the amount of spending was just staggering. So Thornton Township is kind of looking at the Village of Dolton, which Tiff, the super mayor, the dictator of Dolton, Tahoe Tiff without the Tahoes, she is the mayor of Dolton, and they are the Thornton Township, which we watched the meeting on last night. And this is when she came up with this. I don't want a credit card. It's just like, that's because there's no limit left on them anymore. You got no line of credit on those credit cards. You spent it all. It's gone. It's toasted. And with that Lori Lightfoot coming out, this is just the end result of that. Credit cards. I don't have anything to do with credit cards. Well, that's because all the money's already been spent and you don't have any options. You got no options here. Thornton Township trustees are putting limits on spending for township events by Supervisor Tiffany Henyard's administration and enacting rules for use of credit cards by township staff. They didn't really have rules in the past because they didn't have an administration like the one that the super mayors brought in, where they just looked at this opportunity of how much we got on those credit cards, how much limit do we have? I mean, a really good example of that, and I know we've brought this up multiple times, is the leases on Tahoe Tiff's Tahoes. At 3 Tahoes and a Ford Explorer, I think it was. So they had 4 SUVs, right? And the police are basically driving them around. One of them had an MSRP of, I think it was a hair under 100. It's a, Tahoe, big rig. I mean, like big expensive American rigs now, right? $100,000 for a big SUV. That's insane. But the insanity wasn't that they were buying they were leasing. They're not even buying, they're leasing, put on a 5-year lease, this $100,000 Tahoe. And with all the fees and the interest rate on this lease that they didn't have to have board approval of, came to like $150K. Just drove up the cost. And they went through this hard money lender leasing company because they didn't have to have board approval. They just went out and did it. Now, it's my understanding that they're going to be turning those back if they haven't already turned those Tahoes back. I know a huge source of contention, but a handful of SUVs that they were actually going to spend over the lease of the course of the 5-year lease on those rigs. They were going to spend $713,000 on leases on 4 vehicles. I mean, and then you don't even have an ownership interest at the end. And Tahoe Tiff doesn't care because she knows, maybe I won't get elected as mayor anyway. In 5 years from now, maybe I won't even be mayor, but hey, drove around in some pretty nice Tahoes and they call me Tahoe Tiff. So, the actions came during a township board meeting Tuesday that actually started out as 2 meetings, both held in the township's South Holland offices, but in different rooms on different floors. They had a meeting going on upstairs, and then they had this meeting going on downstairs that hadn't started yet. You had live streams from both, and you're just kind of like, what's going on here? The one that was downstairs that was supposed to start at 6 or 5:30, I think it was, ended up starting close to 7 o'clock with Tahoe Tiff offering 0 in the way of apologies. If you have people sitting there for an hour just twiddling their thumbs, apologize. Hey, I am so sorry. Our meeting upstairs ran late, but Tahoe Tiff cares about nobody except herself. I mean, she's proven that time and time again with her spending and with her interaction with the citizens of not only Dolton, but the Thornton Township. An ordinance regulating spending for township-sponsored events gives township department chiefs a spending cap of $1,000 per week or $10,000 per month and requires the board to sign off on event budgets before money is committed or spent. Well, the damage has already been done. That's the bottom line here. Damage has already been done. Can't get that money back. And we don't know exactly how much money the township of Thornton has lost because of Tiff's leadership. But we do know for a fact that towards the end of her big spending spree here, some expenses that were incurred in Dolton were put on the credit cards of Thornton and Thornton Township. And that's a huge no-no because now you are co-mingling expenses. You are misappropriating money from one entity to pay for another, and the two don't have anything to do with each other. Second ordinance is intended to regulate use of credit cards by township staff. Township meetings are typically held on the second floor upstairs of the township building in South Holland, and there were people seated there along with trustee Darlene Gray Everett and clerk Loretta Wells. People attending the meeting, however, were shunted. They were pushed to a large room in the building's basement where large video monitors up front showed a live feed from the boardroom that was happening upstairs, as well as a live feed from the room downstairs where people were just kind of sitting around waiting. I was watching the live stream from reality TV. I watched almost the whole damn thing as I was watching the protests at the DNC. Protests at the DNC, those are so sad because those are not really protests. Antifa showed up and, the pro-Palestinian protesters, that's just straight up Antifa because nobody else really cares. So they showed up and the cops outnumbered them, 5-1, 10-1, something like that. So it became very obvious in Chicago, where you got the DNC and also you got Tahoe Tiff doing her thing just a little further south. In Chicago, you've got this leadership issue where, you know what? We were okay. With the fentanyl Floyd, with George Floyd. We were okay with those protests and, the mostly peaceful rioting and setting the town on fire. We were okay with that. But since we got a bunch of important Democrat politicians in town, we can't really have that kind of thing going on. So they just gave the green light to the Chicago Police Department from the top down. You got the supervisor out there literally making arrests. Whereas in Portland, during the same thing, 2020, mayor is out there, giving hugs to Antifa. And it's the greatest thing ever. Now Chicago, because the pro-Palestinian, and they're not on board with that. But yeah, we're going to have to drop the hammer on these terrible rioters. Now they're called rioters. News media is calling them rioters. All of a sudden, we've gone from peaceful protesters to violent rioters, and they need to be arrested. They set up a temporary court to handle all the arrests. Last night, there were 73 arrests made. That's the last count I saw. 73 arrests made because we come to find out that if you arrest people and don't allow them to just run amok in your city and light things on fire and loot, yeah, the city is much more controlled and there's less violence and there's less vandalism and there's less people losing their livelihoods. Who knew? Who knew that could be a thing? Yeah, I mean, it's just Chicago wants to support their politicians, and they basically gave the protesters during Black Lives Matter carte blanche to do whatever they want, but with pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel. Oh, yeah, no, we're not supporting that. Therefore, cops, get out there and arrest the F out of those people. That's what I saw. So I'm flipping back in between that. And has Tiff started the meeting yet? Oh, she hasn't. All right, let's go back to the protesters. But it's the protesters. I mean, night one at the DNC, the big story was, the protesters, they breached the outer security fencing. These are just some standard federal fences. And they were shocked when the fences got taken down because some knucklehead from Antifa whips out a big hammer, a little mini sledgehammer from his backpack and just starts beating the fencing apart. I watched, the protesters in Portland tear down that fencing entirely, big stretch out in front of the federal building in about 15 minutes. I mean, let's be honest. Any of the fencing that we put up for this stuff is not going to do anything. If you got a, 20, 30 guys all getting together and just reefing on a bunch of metal, pounding it out with these big hammers. Yeah, I mean, this fencing should secure the area. No, it won't. We've seen it before. We know it won't. It doesn't do anything. It just makes people feel warm and fuzzy. But the whole media story was, they took down the fencing and then the cops had to put it back up. 3 trustees who were at odds with Henyard, Carmen Carlisle, Chris Gonzalez, and Gerald Jerry Jones, sat at long tables in the downstairs overflow room. At one point, Henyard came downstairs and spoke briefly with Jones and Gonzalez before leaving as people repeatedly chanted, meeting downstairs, because they didn't want to go upstairs. They don't want to be upstairs. It's a really small room and it's really confined. So they want everything to be downstairs. And I agree with that. Stan Lee, he's one of the older gentlemen that he's spoken up a lot with the Village of Thornton. And I think he was some kind of singer. He had a music career at one point in time. But he literally said, we need to make a motion to have everything down here because it makes more sense. There was something of a standoff, and a few minutes later, Carlisle explained to those waiting that because they needed the clerk to call the roll on votes and record the meeting, they couldn't begin despite having enough trustees for a quorum, meaning they had the majority. They could start the meeting, but when they got roll call and they need to be able to do that thing, still got a bunch of the other people upstairs, it was a no-go. And roughly 160 people waited downstairs and other board members were seated upstairs. Henyard could be seen in the video feed with her back turned and conversing with the board's attorney. And her defense attorney, she brought her defense attorney to the meeting. That was interesting. The junior attorney, though. The meeting, scheduled to begin at 6 p.m., didn't get underway until just before 7, after Henyard, Wells, and Gray Everett joined the 3 trustees. Just this whole convoluted mess. I mean, why aren't you starting meetings on time? Why can't you organize that? Why can't you just get people there when they're supposed to be there and not waste everybody's time? That's how Tiff rolls, right? That's how the dictator of Dolton rolls, and that's why she's got that nickname. The board's vote to set caps on event spending drew harsh remarks from Henyard, who said, I don't want a credit card. And that's because you used it all up. You don't need a credit card anymore. It's gone. You got no credit left on it. That was in Dolton anyway. Township of Thornton, who knows? We don't know much about the finances of Township of Thornton, but if left to her devices, Tiff would have emptied out Township of Thornton as well. She had deep pockets in Village of Dolton when she started. They had a positive, they had a surplus. And now, they got a big budget deficit, a big one. And a lot of that has to do with just straight up overspending and financial mismanagement. Financial mismanagement, which the Township of Thornton is trying to prevent, and that's why they're doing exactly what they're doing here that we saw in last night's meeting. Gonzalez said the ordinance is in no way looking to eliminate these things, but establish financial oversight. I have no problem with what they brought up. It made sense to me. I think they're just kind of looking in from outside. They're looking in at what Lori Lightfoot's report, brought up, and they're like, good Lord, we need to protect ourselves. We need to come up with some protocol that kind of thing that happened in Dolton doesn't happen to us here in Township of Thornton. We're not looking to necessarily cut things out, he said. Departments would have to file detailed plans with the board, including costs for event planning, venue rental, equipment, and prizes and awards, according to the ordinance. Township's finance department will be required to conduct regular audits of event-related expenses, and departments would need to file monthly reports, detailed spending, according to the ordinance. Basic governmental functions that in a lot of entities you already have. A lot of municipalities, you've already got these things in place. But I think TIF ran so amok in the Village of Dolton that now they're overreacting. Now they've gone the full, direction, the opposite direction. So now they're going to have a bunch of stuff that TIF's going to rail on as saying, this isn't efficient. Well, we don't know what you're going to do. And frankly, we don't know what you've done being in the past, because the spotlight is on TIF and her cohorts now, specifically former Deputy Police Chief Louis Lacey. I mean, he's got the spotlight on him. In setting rules for use of credit cards, Gonzalez said, we need to put some safeguards in place to regulate what's spent on credit cards. Yeah. I do not want a credit card, Henyard said. I do not deal with money. I do not want a credit card. I do not deal with money. TIF. Famous last words. I do not deal with money. Really? You deal with spending it. You spend an awful lot of it. Hey, you guys want some overtime pay? I'm not authorized to get of OT pay, TIF, with my contract. We'll give it to you anyway. Just put the invoice in. We'll give it to you. All kinds of deals like that. I do not deal with money. No. You deal with money. You're just virtue signaling now that you don't deal with money because you want to kind of distance yourself from all that money you already spent. All that financial mismanagement that, when you run through millions of dollars within a village, within a fairly small village, you're going to get caught. Somebody somewhere is going to go, oh, wait a minute. And how about all those lawsuits with all those vendors who haven't been able to get their bills paid because TIF and cohorts held up 589 checks that were written, drawn up, signed, just not passed out to those who had earned them with their labor, with their work, with whatever their businesses are. Yeah, that's how you have a budget that's how you have money anyway, cash flow to keep paying your overpaid police officers who aren't eligible for OT. That money's got to come from somewhere. So you just don't pay the legit vendors that should be getting paid. So Township of Thornton is looking in, kind of going, oh, we need to put some safeguards up in this, what. So that's what they're doing. I do not want a credit card. I do not deal with money. Now, we've heard TIF say that multiple times. Who'd she say that to? Dane Placco, I think it was. I do not deal in money. I do not handle that. You're like, yeah, but you authorized that money to be spent, didn't you? As mayor, you authorized it, didn't you? We know you did. The FBI knows you did. FBI. That's why they're probing you. Giving you a little probe. Trustees held off taking action on a budget and appropriation ordinance for the township, but did not give a clue as to when it might be reconsidered. That they tabled it. They couldn't agree on it. They tabled it. So that they're thinking on half this stuff. Well, when TIF gets indicted, maybe we'll have somebody reasonable in there that we can just run all this stuff through and get it approved. They gotta be thinking something like that. Because when your fearless leader is literally nicknamed the dictator of Dolton and has multiple investigations by authorities, the FBI, That's when you know, all is not well in paradise, right? Gonzalez said, this budget is a little bloated. They are second guessing everything now because there's a known story, which is Tiff has absolutely run roughshod over the Village of Dolton and spent all their money and spent money they didn't have and spent money that will never be recovered. One more kind of little part of last night's meeting that I thought was interesting is they had quite a few of the citizens of Township of Thornton get up and just publicly blast Tiff, the super mayor. Just get up there and just basically state their mind and say, hey, we do not appreciate you spending money like this. You cannot do this here in Township of Thornton. And, we've been hearing that consistently more and more and more. And we've been hearing it from Village of Dolton as well, because Dolton's already cooked. The books are cooked, such as they are. They don't even really have books in Dolton. But we know, just given the bare basics from Mayor Lori Lightfoot, former Mayor Lori Lightfoot, former prosecutor Lori Lightfoot, from her report, how bad the situation is in Dolton. So Township of Thornton doing some preventative, trying to figure out ways to what can we do so that this doesn't happen to the Township of Thornton as well. That's it for me on this one. Thanks so much for being here. Love to have you subscribe, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.